I thank you for that kind intro, and thanks for wishing me luck. I can always use good luck when I'm sharing new ideas, and I appreciate that. And there's no group. Sorry, it is really echoey. Is there any way to just bring down the volume a little bit? Oh, well, he's up here. He's like, give me a chance. I'm walking back there already. Like, don't. Thanks, man. I'm thrilled to be here with you guys today, and there is no group where I would rather talk about some new ideas in education than this one. And I actually started, it's not on the bio there, but I actually started my career in teacher prep. I worked for Brigham Young University, rethinking and redesigning their teacher prep program. And so I actually feel probably more at home in this group than I do in most. So let me just jump in and say a little bit. You know, in fact, even before diving into the topic, let me share a little bit about a couple things about me that you may not know, and it may help shape or at least understand some of the thoughts I'm going to share. The first is I'm a father of 4 kiddos. They keep me incredibly busy. And I'm actually missing one in this picture, but it was a picture from Halloween that I thought was hilarious, so I used that, and I'm sure my 4th child will sue me someday for emotional damages for not having included him in my keynote. But really, really excited to have a fantastic family, and it's a great chance to really understand firsthand what things are like in the education system. I've never felt more helpless than the day my first kid started kindergarten. Having worked in education for a long time and realizing that actually I had absolutely no control over what was happening to my kid. So there's some really great things that have come from being able to be part of the education system on multiple sides. As Ludmila mentioned, up until I had been working at the U.S. Department of Education, I was appointed by the president to lead the technology agenda. But for the last year and a half, I returned to my home state of Rhode Island. And the governor of Rhode Island said something interesting. She said, I'm really curious. We have not had a state here in the U.S. that has had a innovation team, a dedicated innovation team. Some cities have done that. No states have done that. And she said, excuse me, she said, I wonder what that would look like. What would it look like if we were to create that? And so we started out with a sort of a challenge, which was, what would it look like to create a lab state for education? What would it look like, sort of the R&D shop for education for the country? And that's what we set out to do. And so there's some interesting things that we learned along the way, some of which I'll share with you in a little bit. And so it was great to go from working at a national level to actually being at the smallest state in the country and see kind of what we could do in different areas. And then as Ludmila mentioned, as of just a little over a month ago, I took on a new role as the CEO of ISTE. ISTE is interesting, if you're not familiar with the organization, we're very focused on using technology to reinvent education. That's probably the fastest way I could describe what it is. But it's interesting because there are some parallels between our organization and ACE, because one, we both are very interested in looking at using technology as a lever to improve learning. That's the first piece. And the second is, both organizations are very sort of known for bringing people together across silos, across different domains. And I think that's an interesting sort of piece that we share in common. By the way, a third thing that we share in common is that our conferences are both at the same time. So I'm going to be running out of here after our Q&A and catching a flight and flying out to San Antonio so that I can join the rest of my team. But I stayed behind. Yes, you're welcome. I stayed behind because I wanted to have a chance to connect with you all today. So anyway, so that's a bit about me. So your turn. So I wanted to get a little bit of a sense of who's here. So I was going to have you all stand up and introduce yourselves and say who you're. It would be a great way to pass the time without having me to do a whole lot of work. But I will not do that. I was I was thinking about saying I was going to do that just to see Sarah's face, but I won't do that. But I would love to just to get a little bit of a sense of who's here. Can we just do it this way real quick? If you are in the higher ed space, and some of these may apply more than one, right? This is not mutually exclusive for the statisticians, the survey creators that are out there. So if you're in the higher ed space, you just raise your hands. We see who's here. Awesome, great. If you are in the K-12 space, oh, yay, way to represent. Thank you. Any librarians? Anybody that would consider themselves a librarian? Yes, good. Couple strong supporters. Any students? Yeah, okay, cool, thank you. If you have been working in education for less than 10 years, will you raise your hand? Great. glad to see you here. Between 10 and 20 years in education. Okay, 20 or more years in education. Wow, awesome, 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 great group. If this is the first time you're coming to EdMedia, raise your hand. Welcome, that's awesome. I'm glad you're here. If you've been to more than 5 EdMedia conferences, raise your hand. Nice. Good. Hopefully some of those that are here for the first time will also be back for that. If you've never, I'm just tying on to the the intro here. If you've never been to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, will you raise your hand? Okay, all of you just leave right now and go, no. But can I make a quick plug though for those of you who may have not spent much time in the DC area? The Air and Space Museum is awesome, and I'm a pilot, as Ludmila said, and so I have a special interest in that one. But if you have never been to the Renwick Gallery, the Renwick Gallery is right by the White House. It is the sort of craft museum, and it is mind-blowingly awesome. So also part of the Smithsonian, also free, but just unbelievable. So if you get a chance, and it's a fast one, it's the smallest museum, and so you can go through very quickly. So I would add that to your list, the Renwick Gallery. Okay, let me move on a little bit, and let's talk about what the topic is I want to share today. And I wish the format was sort of like us sitting down at a table, because I'm going to be sharing some stories with you, and I would love it to feel a bit more like a conversation than a traditional keynote. Because of the format of the room, we can't really do that, but I certainly will have some time for questions, and then after this is over, right kind of through that wall over there, we will have a follow-on discussion where I will not be presenting anything. It will literally just be us sharing what's your thoughts and certainly asking questions or pushing back. And so if we don't have time to have more of a discussion here, I invite you to that. Let me just start by saying that we do some goofy things in education. There are some traditions that we have held for some really legitimate reasons, but don't serve our students well. And I want to share 3 of those today. The first is that we treat all students generally the same, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of their interests, regardless of their needs, their challenges, whatever it is, we generally treat them the same. This is silly because, of course, students aren't the same, right? We know that. We would never buy them all the same size pants. We would never buy them all the same birthday present. We would never, right? I mean, you could sort of go down the list. And so why have we become comfortable with teaching them all the same thing? I believe the least equitable thing we do in education is treat all students the same. And I think we need to be thinking about, I did a TED Talk a couple years ago. My mom and about 3 other people have watched it online. But one of the things, I'm going to just share a little piece that I shared in there, because I was trying to make this point. I had a group of people that I was trying to explain why this is, because we're so familiar with it, we're so comfortable with it, that we're like, yeah, of course, we take all the students in a classroom, we teach them all the same thing. And so I said, all right, I put this slide up, and I said, imagine if you went to a doctor's office, and you walked into the doctor's office, and you said, hey, I'm not feeling well, and the doctor said, great, take these pills. And your immediate reaction would be, do you want to check and see what's wrong with me? And the doctor said, no, it's Tuesday. We give everybody the white pills on Tuesday. The guy behind me was like clutching his heart when he was coming in here, right? Like having a heart attack. What did you do to him? Well, I gave him the white pills. It's Tuesday. We give everybody, like, come on. It's like, if you want the green pills, come on Wednesday, and we give everybody the green pills on Wednesday, right? You see, when we apply that concept, that logic to medicine, it just seems preposterous. We would never do that. There would be lawsuits. There would be, because it's a right. We understand that there is a sort of fundamental right for a patient to come in the doctor, for the doctor to figure out what they need and then prescribe their treatment accordingly. And that same concept, I don't think, has transitioned over to education. And by the way, to be clear, I don't think it's because any of us disagree. It's because it has been very hard to do within our current system. I taught for years, and I essentially did this. And so I'm trying to be careful to not be critical of us as educators, but just to call out that we got an issue here we got to be looking at. Okay, that's the first goofy thing. My second goofy thing that we do in education is we allow the schedule to be more important than student learning. And I felt this really when I was teaching. I was a high school Spanish teacher once upon a while ago, and the thing that was interesting is I said, you know, we all neatly wrapped up our lessons at the same time, right? Unit 1 was over at the end of the week. Unit 2 started on the next week. It was so neat and clean. We prioritized the system around having the schedule be implemented with absolute fidelity. Nobody was off on the schedule. We all ended at the same time. We all ended right. And what we sacrificed, what we allowed to flex, was the level of learning. So we had students that would come in and we'd say, you know, look, we're at the end of this unit, and I know that you don't understand. Dang, Unit 2 is going to really stink for you, because we're moving on, and it's okay. We're just going to let you continue to, you know, fail through the next unit because it builds on this unit, which you didn't get. At the same time, I also had learners, and this was incredibly frustrating for me, who I knew right at the beginning they already got this. They knew this for whatever. I taught Spanish, and so sometimes we'd have, you know, native speaker or two, and there was pieces they didn't get, but some stuff they just totally had down. And my answer then was, sit there and act like you care for a week. Because the schedule is the thing that we put our priority around. It will not flex. You can flex. Your ability to learn can flex, but our schedule will not flex. That's just one of the challenges that we have. Okay, my third one is we allow, how do I say this? Student data comes far too late to be useful. Most of our testing, summative assessments that we do in education, are what I call autopsy data, right? They come after, as this sort of has here, right? They come after, you know, the purpose that they serve is to make us feel bad, right? Now look, just to be clear, I am not saying there isn't a need for summative assessment, and I think it is incredibly important to look at how schools are performing and to make sure that there aren't schools that are letting students as a category, groups of students fall behind. That's incredibly important. But from a learning standpoint, there's very little value that comes when the results of a test show up after it's too late to inform instruction. And so when we have a situation where we come back and, you know, a week after I'd moved on to the next unit, and I'd be like, oh man, these 10 kids didn't get it, and they all failed this test. Wow, well, all I can do right now is feel bad. And all they could do is feel bad because it was too late to adjust the instruction. And so one of the things that I think we need to be thinking about and asking this question is, where and how can we be thinking about the timeliness of that data? If it doesn't inform instruction, it serves no purpose for the student or the teacher. And that's something that we're going to just have to be grappling with. So this is why I've been so interested in lately this idea of personalized learning. How can we think about new approaches? And there isn't a single approach. I'll talk about that more in a second. There isn't like a single approach I'm promoting here. This is a concept of designing learning experiences that addresses those three goofy problems that we've allowed to persist in education. As a foreign language teacher, I love finding examples of mistranslations. And we have a number of people here that just came through international airports to get here. International airports, it turns out, are like a particularly fertile ground for translation errors. I love going through airports because, again, I used to be a language teacher, so I go through, I'm taking pictures of like the bathroom signs and other stuff. People think I'm crazy. I just think it's hilarious. I love to see what happens when translations go awry. So this is one that I found that I thought was particularly interesting. It says, you know, for restrooms, go back towards your behind, which certainly seems like it could be a legitimate translation if you don't understand the language. But the point that I'm making, the reason I have this here is to say that language matters. When we talk about language for education, when we talk about models of education, when we talk about the vision that we're hoping for, the language we use to describe it really matters. And I learned, when I was in Rhode Island, we got to Rhode Island, we said, we're going to try to have the state be the first state that has a statewide personalized learning sort of program. That was our goal. We said, great, we're gonna do this. And so I went in and I sat in a room. The nice part of Rhode Island is you can like bring all of the superintendents into a room, which is great. So we sat in a room and we were talking about personalized learning, and I realized everybody was they're like, yes, we are all gonna do personalized learning. Some of us we're already doing personalized learning. No, you're not. They were all excited, and I realized that if I could see the thought bubbles pop up in all of their heads, I couldn't, but imagine if I could do that. If we walked into a room and put a bunch of education leaders and said, we're going to talk about personalized learning, and you could watch the boom, 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 you know, all the thought bubbles pop up, what you would see is very different things in each of those thought bubbles. And I think, unfortunately, that has made it hard to get at some of these issues because it means very, very different things. We had some some superintendents that would say, yes, we do personalized learning. We allow our students to choose what after-school activities they want to do once a semester. Done. Right? And we're like, nah, not so much. On the other side, we'd have, sometimes we'd have software vendors that'd be like, we totally do personalized learning. We have this computer that we put the kids in front of, we log them in at the beginning of the day, they sit there and they click next until 3 o'clock, we have totally nailed personalized learning. And again, I just sort of start to cry because that is not the experience that I think. And so when we keep over and over, we sort of keep using this word personalized learning, and we think about personalized learning. And for any of you that are familiar with the movie Princess Bride, right? Remember this guy? You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. This is the challenge with personalized learning. So here's what I want to try to do. For just a second, I'm going to give some examples of what this looks like in practice. But I want to just talk about what do I mean when I use this word. And I would encourage all of us as we talk about personalized learning, and frankly, all of the concepts that we're going to talk about here, just to be clear around our language, because it really does matter. So in Rhode Island, when we realized that we had this wide sort of range of what people thought this meant, we stopped. We stopped and we pulled back and we said, we're going to think about this a little bit differently. And we started a whole series of town hall meetings. We pulled people together. We looked at all the definitions. In fact, we created an appendix to the guide that I'm about to share with you, which went and found every definition we could find of personalized learning and crosswalked them. It's just a 2-page thing, and it just shows who says what and where and how does it line up. And we went through this big process, and we created a vision document. It was not an implementation guide; it was a vision. What the heck do we mean by statewide personalized learning? And that's what we created. By the way, I made a special arrangement for any of you here attending EdMedia to get a free copy of this. If you search for RI Personalized Learning on Google, you can download a free copy of this. It's free for everybody. I'm sorry, I had to just say that because you're like, oh, free for me, I'll go download it. Everybody can get it for free, but I would recommend if you have a minute, go take a look at this. Search RI Personalized Learning, and you'll get this this vision guide, and it steps through what we were thinking about. I'm not going to go through any more of it, other than just to say, here's the definition that we came up with, and it's a definition that sets out the fact that personalized learning is a student experience where the pace of learning and the instructional approach are optimized for the needs of each learner. Standards-aligned learning objectives, instructional approaches, and instructional content may all vary based on learning needs. In addition, learning activities are meaningful and relevant to learners and often often self-initiated. That's a lot. Even that much of a definition is a lot for this time in the morning. So for those of you who are maybe were a little late coming on flights last night, here's my super simple version of what I mean by personalized learning. The pace adjusts, the approach adjusts, and the learning is tied to student needs and experiences. There you go. That's what we're talking about. That last one's particularly interesting because I think one of the areas, I didn't talk about this in my sort of goofy things at the beginning, but maybe I should have. I think a lot of times we don't make it explicit why it's important for learners to be learning a particular concept. Again, back to this concept of me being a pilot. I love to fly. I love planes. It's something I've always loved. When I was a kid, I would go, be volunteer crew at balloon festivals and ultralight festivals. I also hated math. And interestingly enough, you may be aware, you need math in order to be a pilot. Well, at least if you want to be a pilot for a long time, anyway. So the idea of math is actually a critical concept. If I had even a glimpse of an understanding of a connection between the math that I was learning and the fact that would make me be a better pilot someday, you wouldn't have been able to kick me out of the class at the end of the end of the day. But I had no idea how that would ever be relevant to me in my life. And so I think that's a piece on that last one that we really need to be thoughtful about. Now, one more thing on language, and then we'll move on to the other examples here. There are lots of similar concepts. There are lots of related concepts to personalized learning that I think sometimes get conflated. And somebody asked me to, I can't remember who it was, maybe it was Educause, said, will you write an article explaining all of these different terms? And so I wrote, I did what academics do. I wrote this big long article with all these citations. And afterwards I thought, by making it more complicated, I actually don't know that I'm helping. Like, my whole point is we're not using language, clearly and concisely. And so I just wrote this like 5-page paper to explain what 2 terms meant. And I was like, all right, here's what we're going to do differently. So I did hand them in the paper, but I was like, I'm going to submit this to you with the agreement that at the bottom you can let me summarize it in a tweet. So here is my patented, which you are welcome to steal, my patented learning concepts in a tweet. And I came up with the ones that I believe are most commonly used and conflated with personalized learning. So competency-based learning, you move on when you show what you can do, right? You show you can do it, you move on. There you go, there's competency-based learning. Adaptive learning, technology assigns the educational resource, right? It's a computer that says, based on what you know, we're gonna adapt this, and here's the next thing that you get. Individualized learning, pace is adjusted. Differentiated learning, the approach is adjusted. Differentiate based on your needs. And then personalized learning, somewhere in my slide before, the pace and approach are adjusted, and we add some student agency in there. See, you already have, I was gonna say you all now have a PhD in learning science, but you already had a PhD in learning science because I'm at EdMedia. But if you had not, here you go. So this is the idea. Is can we be concise and clear and not just, let me say it this way. I am not proposing that everybody has to agree, but I am proposing that we need to be overt about what we mean when we use these terms. So there we go. Done with dictionary time, closing the book. What does it look like? This is really the more exciting part, right? What are we talking about when we talk about personalized learning? I'm not going to tell you. Instead, I'm going to talk about restaurants. Bear with me. So I used to study graphic design. I did a little bit of time studying graphic design. And graphic design, I loved. I'm also a bit of a foodie. And one of the things that my wife and I have tried to do is figure out, how do we know when there's a really good restaurant? What's the restaurant that we want to go to? And at first we're like, well, we could read all the reviews, but that takes a long time. And then we're like, what? How can we maybe Yelp because there's 5 stars, but that doesn't always line up. And so I'm always interested in what I call litmus test, right? Because litmus test, if you're familiar with these awesome things, is little strips of paper. You just drop it in, and immediately will tell you if it's acidic or whatever, right? I love finding litmus tests for complicated concepts. And so we've been trying to figure out what is the easiest way to determine whether there's a good restaurant with the highest level of reliability. And at one point we're like, we stumbled across this idea, which is, if you look at the graphic design used in the logo of the restaurant, the better the graphic design almost always means the food's gonna be better. There's a very high correlation. This is very scientific research that I've done on this, right? I eat a lot of food, I look at the logo. And I don't know why. I think if there's people in their restaurant that take the time to actually care about graphic design, probably means they care about other things. And then we refined it even further the other day and decided it's actually the font. You can literally look at the choice of font in the title of restaurant, and that will be a very high indicator of the quality of food. And so there are these interesting ways, and if you think about this, try it out while you're here in DC, try it out. Let me know if it works. If not, EdMedia will reimburse all of your food while you're here. But I think, sorry, but this idea of, are there quick things that we can see that identify whether or not something, a broader concept is useful in education. And so what I want to share are a few of these litmus tests that I figured out for identifying personalized learning. When I walk in, if I'm seeing these sorts of things, I'm pretty convinced that these are going to be high-quality personalized learning experiences. Now, yes, of course, there should be deep, ongoing studies and all of the looking at data. I'm not throwing any of that under the bus. I'm just saying, what's just the gut thing that I should be looking for? Just like when I'm just quickly trying to decide whether a restaurant's a good restaurant or not, what is the quick way that I can decide? So here we go. The first is multiple approaches. Now, what I mean by this is, and I said it before, personalized learning is a concept. There is no single model for this. And so if you get into a situation where somebody is trying to sell you, one piece of software that immediately does personalized learning, I would be skeptical. If somebody is saying there's only one way to make this happen, I would be skeptical, even within a school, even within a classroom. And so the first thing that I want to see is are there multiple approaches? Let me share a couple. This is a school in Rhode Island. It's a great school. It was a school that was struggling, failing for years. and they started to implement a personalized learning model. Now, the way they did this is they used something called station rotation model, which you may be familiar with. And so there was some direct instruction, and then a group of students would then rotate over, and they would have some instruction they would be using adaptive software for. I don't have any problem with adaptive software. I'm just saying it's not the same, plugging a kid in front of software all day is not the same as personalized learning. It's a piece of the broader ecosystem, right? So they had some students that were doing some adaptive software that was helping, and they had a third group where they had students actually working on projects together, right? This was a way that they were able to, in different contexts, address what the different student needs were. It worked very well in that school. They've now had 5 years of sustained increase in student achievement, and it was based on this transition, which is pretty cool. Here's another example. This was a school that I was visiting in Tucson, Arizona. I walked up. I used to teach high school, as I mentioned, and so as I was walking up to visit with the superintendent, I saw these kids outside, messing around with a plant out there, so I knew they were up to no good, right? This is during class. I can tell, right? I'm a veteran high school teacher. I know when somebody is up to something that they shouldn't be, and so I walked up and said, where are you supposed to be right now? That's what teachers say, and they said, in our biotech class. Which took me back a little bit because I actually honestly didn't know what a biotech class was. We hadn't invented that, I think, when I was in school. And so I said, okay, well, let's go. Should you be there? They said, no, we are actually in our biotech class. And I said, well, can you explain a little more? And they said, yeah, we are actually working remotely. This is a device that they were holding. We're working remotely with researchers from Arizona State University, and we're collecting genome samples from the indigenous plant life around our school, and we're working together to actually create a genome map of all of the indigenous plant life, and we're publishing it in Science Journal. I said, okay, good. You just keep doing that. I'm gonna go find the restroom here somewhere, right? This is a case where their approach using personalized learning was leveraging technology to bring in expertise that wouldn't have existed in the school otherwise, to provide these students who are working on a project with the ability to go deeper and do that in a way that they just would not have been able to do if it were in the traditional classroom, right? In a traditional classroom, if I was in that class, hey, we want to make this genome map, I'd be like, great, well, I don't know how to do it, so we're really not going to be doing that, moving on to the next thing, right? Not because I wouldn't want to, but what other option do I have? I don't have that expertise. And so in this model, they were using connectivity to bring experts in to be able to allow students to specialize in some new ways. Last example that I'll show of this. This is another model. This is a school that I visited in New York a couple years ago. It's a school, a middle school, and this is math. This is their math classroom there. And when you walk in, you see a series of, in fact, let me see if I have another picture here that I might show. Yeah, okay, so so you walk in and you see these screens, right? These screens are sort of like when you're in an airport and you see the flights and where you go. Except they have the names of the kids, and it says which station they're going to learn that day. And so they go to learn in that day. And there's a variety of different activities that they're doing. It's hard to see in this picture, but you see these kids obviously working together. They're actually working collaboratively here on a project. On the sort of mid-left, you can actually see there's some direct instruction happening, right? You have a teacher that's standing and teaching in front of a group, and then all the way back through the little cubbies there, you can see they are working on, there's some students that are working on projects together, right? And so they are doing these activities. At the end of this particular day, at the end of the lesson, there's a little music that plays, and they assess where the students are, and I'm gonna actually come back to that in a second. They assess where the students are, and then they figure out, based on some teacher input as well, who kind of where you at for the day? What did you figure out? And then the next day, when they come back, they walk in and they look at their that board, the sort of the flight status board there, and they see their name and they see which group they're assigned. Their schedule is automatically customized every day based on how they're doing and which concepts they're struggling with and which concepts they need more help with. And so every day they come in and look, they see, here's where I'm going. They're going to be grouped with different kids. They're going to be grouped with different teachers. They're going to have different activities that they're doing, all based on their actual performance. And that ties very closely in to my next litmus test, my next font test, if you will. And I'm going to use that same picture again because it ties back in. And that's this idea of using formative assessments. one of the reasons why this works, let's go back to here, one of the reasons this works is because we have assessments whose purpose is to inform instruction. It's interesting because we're in a world where I think there's a pushback on over-assessing. And with that, I think we must be done. No, just kidding. I hope it's, people have said I'm in the dark for years, so I won't take it. It's fine. We can do whatever we want to. But here's my deal with this. So even though we're frustrated with assessments, I actually think part of the reason why assessment is such a hot topic is because we don't have enough of it. Now hang on. I know. Hang on. Before we go there, this is important. It's like a disco. So one of the, and what I mean by that is that so much of our assessments are these sort of end of year kind of summative assessments. And one of the challenges I think that we're dealing with is they are such a big deal because it's a surprise. Because there's so much high stakes on this. If you look at doing things like this, at the end of the day, doing a quick, I think they have like a 5-question assessment, right? And it just informs what they're going to do the next day. That's it. It doesn't penalize anybody. It doesn't ever show up in my grade. It helps inform the instruction. That is really, really powerful. And I think that's something we need to think about. By the way, when I was at the White House, we did a game, sort of a game jam. We invited a bunch of game designers in. The designers of Angry Birds, the designers of some from Disney, from Sony. We invited them all in, and we said, "How would you help us rethink next generation assessment?" And it was fascinating because you know what they said? They said, "Guess what? Games, video games, they're assessments." They're constantly checking how a learner, they wouldn't call him a learner, but I will, how a learner is performing, is learning a task, and it allows them to just level up or repeat the same level based on what they need. Fascinating concept. And it's interesting because you don't hear students going, "Oh, I hate all of the over video gaming that's being pushed on us," right? Do you hear that? Parents are just like, there is just way too much state-mandated video gaming. No, you don't hear that. But it is an assessment. The difference is it's an assessment that provides value. And that's the issue. When I hear all this pushback around assessment, I'm like, I'm not sure that the assessment is the problem. I think the problem is the way we do assessments now aren't providing the value that you're expecting. And then we have a misalignment, and that's where we really have an issue. So formative assessment is a great thing. When I went through a teacher prep program, we had almost no experience designing or implementing formative assessment. And I believe that's changing, but I still visit a lot of teacher prep programs where there is nowhere near enough focus on how to use formative assessment to adapt and adjust instruction. Okay. 2 more. Visualizing progress. This is a fun one. Anybody have one of these on? Do you know what these are? Yeah, see? I didn't bring mine today, which means none of the walking I'm doing today counts. I'm going to sit down there and not move for the rest of the time I'm here because my steps aren't counting. But if you're not familiar with what this is a Fitbit or any whatever. There's probably a bunch of Apple Watch sort of does this too, and it's a device that gives you data throughout the day. It tells you how you are performing. It says, I have been sitting at my desk, not doing much all day. But here's the interesting thing. I joke about this whenever I talk about this. I say, look, I've been with myself all day. I know that I've been sitting at my desk. I know that I've been eating Twinkies instead of apples, right? Why is it then so powerful when I see this and I change my behavior? Visualizing our behavior is one of the most powerful ways to change what we do. And it doesn't matter that I know that I've been sitting. When I see it visually, I suddenly realize that I have a chance to make better choices. The ability to visualize student data, the ability to say, hey, you know what, here is how you're performing, and here's where you may be doing well, and here's where you may be struggling. That is a very, very powerful way to shift behavior. Much more powerful than me just telling you need to do it because you got to get into college in 10 years, because I really care about that as a 3rd grader. Right? This is a concept that I think we need to be thinking more about. What do learning dashboards, what do learning positioning systems, if we can use that language, like a GPS in our car, right? What does a learning positioning system look like in education? There are a number of them. One of my favorites, by the way, is one called Khan Academy that some of you are familiar with. I'm not super thrilled. I mean, Khan does all these videos, and yeah, they're all right. Like, it's one way of instruction. But this is the cool thing that they do, if you're not familiar with it. It's this map that shows how you are performing through a whole variety of assessments. And in the squares, I know it's hard to see up there, but all those gray boxes up on the top, those are all of the skills that they have, that they provide instruction around. And the color gets darker as you demonstrate mastery until they're dark blue, which means that you've really demonstrated mastery over time. What's interesting is I went in here and I was taking the screenshot for this presentation. My wife's like, I'll meet you upstairs, and I'm like, I'll be up, I'm just taking a quick screenshot, right? Like an hour later, she comes back, and she's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm taking a screenshot. She's like, it takes an hour to take a screenshot? I was like, well, like my math score was really low. It just said like 5 more minutes, and I could jump up to the next level, and so an hour later, I was doing elementary math, trying to get my score up to 550 before I took the dang screenshot. And I don't even care about elementary math. And so the point is, it's so powerful when you can visualize your progress that even me, for a silly screenshot, was sitting there for an extra hour because just 5 more minutes and I'll level up on the next one. And so this idea of visualizing is really important. The last one is the idea of student agency. And this, I think, to this group, I don't think I need to really talk much about it, but I would feel like it's my responsibility to talk about the importance of really empowering students as learners. We hear all these things about we can't prepare, we don't know what jobs the students are going to be doing in the future because we can't prepare them right. We know all that, but we sort of go, oh, wow, that's interesting, right? Like, what a funny kind of thing to say, but I don't see us really doing much about it. What I want to do is shift that to say there is something we can do. What we can do is prepare them to be the owners of their learning. Because yes, you're right, we don't know what jobs we're going to prepare them for, but we do know that whatever they are, if we prepare them to be the ones in control of the learning process, they're going to be fine. And so we need to be thinking about how do we really put them in the driver's seat. This is a good point for me to mention that personalized learning helps tee up options. It helps tee up decisions for students. It does not take away choice. And the reason I put this Netflix up there is because sometimes when I talk about learning shouldn't be a black box, of course it shouldn't be a black box. Of course it shouldn't take away choice from students. But Netflix is such a great example of this because it helps tee up recommendations for me. Most of the time when I sit down to watch movies or whatever I'm going to watch, most of the time I don't even have to go past that first screen of Netflix. Right? It's helping keep the recommendations. But it does not take away, when I sit down with my 4-year-old and the option up there is Terminator 2, it doesn't make me watch that. I can go in and watch Transformers instead. I still have a choice. It just helps tee up better recommendations. I think that's something we need to think about. And so as we find different ways, technology can be very helpful in teeing up choice, in giving students agency within bounds. It's not do whatever you want time. It's, hey, this is something that you're struggling on. Here are a couple different activities that you could choose between in order to be able to demonstrate. And here's some different ways that you can choose to demonstrate this competency. That's powerful learning. And so then this is no longer me just doing the learning for you. If anybody wants to come to this discussion that we're going to have afterwards, I'll share some examples of ways that I actually tried to do that in classes and be able to say, how do we actually let you be the ones in control of the learning while still being in bounds, still saying, this is what we got to do. Look, this is what we're working on. There's some basic skills that we got to get, but there's a whole variety of ways that they can be put in the learning seat. Just to be clear, in case there is any confusion, because I have been clear about language all along, this does not count as giving students choice. Which I see stuff like this all the time. Are you ready? We give students choice. We let them move from the clicking through from this thing to clicking through on this side of the screen, right? Like not super exciting. Okay, now I'm coming to the end of my time here, so let me sort of wrap with 2 pitfalls to avoid. The first, anybody play this game, by the way? Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you. The first is focusing too much on technology. If there's something that you've heard me say throughout, I hope it's clear, and it's that you can't buy your way to personalized learning with software. Personalized learning is a culture change. It's a value shift. It's a rethinking about the role of students and teachers. It is not something that you can just buy. We launched, when I was at the Department of Ed, we launched a big program that gave almost $1 billion to schools to pilot new models for personalized learning. And we announced it at an event, similar to this one. There was an expo floor. And after we made the announcement, we sort of walking around the expo floor, and everybody was like, supports personalized learning. And I'm like, really? Because yesterday, unless you reprogrammed your software overnight, yesterday it didn't. So I think you just went and put a new sticker on all of the titles of your software. And so we need to be very careful that we don't think that personalized learning is about adopting software. This is about really thinking through culture and what the roles of teachers and students are. Okay, so that's pitfall number 1. Pitfall number 2, not focusing enough on technology. I was visiting a school in the UK. This was south of London. And they were doing some truly amazing work. It's one of the best personalized experiences I've seen. It was a school that had been struggling for years, really kind of a rough area. And they took this model. Charter schools are a relatively new concept in the UK. And so they've been making these sort of academies, they call them. Anyway, they created this school, and they went in and they said, we're going to make our change by looking at how do we personalize learning for students. And so they all of a sudden, starting from when they made that shift, started to see these kids. It was essentially a dropout factory would be the language we would use. All of a sudden are staying, they're graduating, they're engaged, they're going on to college out of this town where you would never expect that. And by the way, where the neighboring schools were still continuing to act as dropout factories. And I went in and I visited the teachers. And one of the first things I realized is they were all like walking around like zombies, right? They're all like falling asleep at their desk. And so I talked to the principal, the head teacher, and I was like, what is the deal? And they said, well, it's because we stay here till like 8 o'clock at night. They walk me into this room, and they have this room, and they have all of the students in the school, and they have Post-it notes up on the wall, and they do their formative assessments. They write down how they're doing on their Post-it notes, and they put them up, and they move them around, and they come up with these customized schedules. It was killing them. It was just like soul crushing the amount of time it was taking to do this. I said, why on earth don't you stop doing this? Because you are, it's just such a huge burden. They're like, how could we possibly stop doing this? Watching that for the first time, these kids have a chance. These kids that nobody thought ever had a chance are going to college. How could we possibly stop doing this? I said, okay, fair. So can we find a way that we can use technology so you can still do this and still have the control as teachers and still, right, this is not just sitting in front of a computer all day, but man, can we get you some help, right? And so that's the piece that I think is really critical when we're thinking about how do we personalize learning is it's not all about the technology. And if you try to do it without any technology support, you're going to be walking around like zombies every day because it's a ton of work. Even just finding the right materials, because you have to find out a lot more content in order to be personalizing in an effective way. So let me do this. There's a couple other thoughts that I could share, but I want to say we have about 4 minutes left, and so instead of sharing my thoughts, I'd love to just open it up in case there are questions. I probably have time for 1 or 2 questions here, and then there'll be time for a broader discussion, as I said, later. But if you have quick questions or thoughts, would love to hear them, and then I'll end with a final thought before I wrap up. Thoughts, comments, questions? Yes? Yeah. Oh, great question. So let me repeat it back. The question is, how would you do this in an online class? For those of you that are teaching online, there's actually a whole bunch of ways to do this. One of the things about online that's nice is actually really easy to collect data. So very quick, using tools with SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or whatever you use, you can very quickly ask short, quick questions, kind of mini quiz questions. Formative assessment's actually a lot easier in some ways to collect online. So be doing that. That's one. One of the things that I love, and I can show some pictures of this next door for anybody who wants to join that conversation, is something that I did when I was teaching an online course where I was incredibly frustrated because we did this thing where we'd ask students to submit their discussion. We use discussion forums, right? They just submit their discussion forums. And I read this stuff, I'm like, it's crap. Sorry to just be so blunt. Like, you don't care, you're not trying. And then I had this sort of, I was talking with students, and I had this idea. I realized they basically said, that some honest students were talking to me, and they said, why should I care about this? I'm working to submit this thing to you that you're going to read and then delete after a couple weeks? And you want me to put my heart and soul into it? Why on earth would I do that? And I thought, you're right. You're absolutely right. And so I was doing that thing where I was not giving them agency. They were not owners. They were not learning owners. So you know, the next semester, we got rid of the LMS. And we said, all of your discussions, you will either post to Medium or to YouTube. And they had to still answer questions, but they were posted on their channel, on their YouTube channel, posted publicly. And students had to make comments, but they were making comments on the other students' YouTube channel. So now this wasn't about me, this was about them owning the learning experience. And something started happening that was really interesting, is they started getting comments from people who weren't in our class, right? potential employers, in some cases, were saying, hey, that's an interesting thought. We're trying to do some of this, right? And so all of a sudden, the quality went way up because the purpose of the learning was not for me for some grade. That was sort of ancillary. It was because they wanted to really be the owners of those ideas. There's more ways that we can think about personalized learning online. By the way, dashboards work really well, just showing where, how people are progressing. There's actually a lot of ways to do that online. Yes? Yes. Yes, thank you. Gosh, this is a, so the question was, how does the faculty role change? I actually, there's a whole hour-long workshop that I do, I will spare you now, on that particular topic, which is how do those roles need to shift and change. One of the things that's interesting, I'm gonna try to give the quick version of it. So we have gone, we've taken, when we've moved online, we have essentially replicated the traditional classroom experience. And so when you go to an online space, the faculty role, you have a faculty, there's actually a role in the system, faculty role, and the faculty has the ability to make the things and upload the stuff, and the students are locked out of being able to do any of that, right? The faculty has that role. There are a limited number of people who can come in. It's sort of a closed wall. We replicate the online space after a closed classroom with one door that the faculty member controls. Interesting. Well, what about thinking that there's some baggage that we carried over that we actually don't have to carry over? Why is it that the roles are different? What if we just had a learning system where the role was learner, and it was all of us, and the faculty member was actually helping to engage and connect, but there were also other experts that were coming in with the same role, and the students had the same role. So I think one of the things that we need to be really careful about is shifting from this idea, and you guys know this, those of you that are here, but this idea of having the control of the learning experience come from the faculty member. That's hard to give up, but it's the best thing you could possibly do. One quick anecdote on that. I was teaching a class once with somebody else. It was actually their class. I was sort of just dropping in for a piece of it. But what we did was instead of a typical syllabus, we have a PDF, a locked down PDF. You cannot change the syllabus. We posted it on a wiki. Said change it, do whatever you want. Here's some guidelines for what you need to do. And we posted up there. At first, nobody dared to touch it, right? They weren't going to dare. And then after a little while, somebody would hesitantly change one thing or swap out an article. And all of a sudden, there started to be this whole conversation that was happening online. And then there were side conversations like, well, I see that you swapped that out, but I think you did that just because you want to do something that's easier. And really, at the end of the day, this is the topic that's probably more important for our class. And so this idea of opening that up and saying, hey, you should be involved in this process as well. If we're trying to create learners, they have to be involved in owning the learning process. And the best thing I think that faculty can do is take on the role of cultivating learners, which means releasing some of the control, and that's hard. I saw a couple other hands. I wish I had time for more questions. I need to wrap up because I know there are other great sessions that are going to be happening. I don't want to push us behind for the rest of the day, but again, happy to continue the conversation in the other room. Let me end with a final thought. As we think about using technology in new ways, I've talked about using it to support personalized learning. We have some important decisions to make. And we've often talked about, you hear often this idea of the digital divide, right? Digital divide, students who have access to technology, those who don't. Very, very quickly, that digital divide is closing. Is there more work to do? Yes, of course there is. But very quickly, because of the ubiquitous nature of technology, of internet, because of the cost of devices, access is quickly closing. But I am worried that we are not being equally concerned about, I actually think, a bigger problem, which is what I call the digital use divide. This is the divide between students who are using technology in ways that enables them to be explorers, to design, to build, to collaborate, and those that are simply using technology as a screen to hit next on, as a passive pipe to push content in their face. And I think we are in a critical moment while we're designing the future of learning to decide which of these models are we going to go with. And it will not, if we let the time run, if we let the clock run, the status quo will give us an exact digital replica of all of the problems that we've had with our current system. Schedules that trump learning, data that comes too late to be useful, content that doesn't give the agency to the student. It will all happen, but it will be on a screen. We have a chance, and it's an incredibly important chance, probably the most important thing that we'll ever do in education, to jump that barrier and say, hey, we're actually going to use these tools in an entirely new way. We're going to use them to help empower learners, to help connect them and have them, again, design and build and create. And in that way, frankly, change the world. And so my invitation to you is help be very thoughtful as you think about, as many of you are teaching future teachers, to help think through how we're using technology to close the digital use divide and make sure it's being used to empower and enable and not as a passive device. And honestly, it is, I believe, the most powerful thing we will do to make a difference in the world if we can do that. Thank you very much.